Within this past week alone, a movement has begun.
We're not going to be silent.
What we're doing now is nowhere near enough.
We will not stop this movement.
See how the survivors from Parkland are already driving change and what happens next.
And should you continue to choose your wallets over our lives, I pray you enjoy retirement.
Plus, we're investigating the state's controversial traffic plans.
Bordering on insane.
They're turning passing lanes into toll lanes while we uncovered complaints about safety and high costs for drivers.
Is this kind of toll regressive?
Could you explain that?
But we'll start with the mass shootings and the part of the problem a lot of politicians may not be thinking about when they focus on money, power, and politics. Before we can figure out how to stop mass shootings, we have to figure out what's causing them.
But when you want to get to the root cause of the problem, you got to do two things. You got to ban assault weapons, and you also have to have the criminal background checks on all purchases of a gun.
If it's all about easy access to guns, you have to ask, well, why is the violent crime rate going down year after year? Why is the murder rate mostly going down year after year?
Very strong emphasis on the mental health of somebody.
And if it's all about a lack of mental health funds, you also have to ask why mass shootings keep going up as we keep spending more and more on mental health. While many shooters like the Vegas killer had no history of mental illness, and others like the Parkland shooter reportedly got mental health treatment.
The solution is not going to be a singular thing. It's going to be multifaceted.
It's not left and right. It's not political. It's a human issue.
Both sides should be, in fact, open to reviewing and conceivably revising mental health policy and background checks and firearm restrictions, school safety, all of these things. But the rash of mass shootings is far more complicated than many politicians on both sides may care to think. And politicians in Congress voted to cut CDC research that would drill into the root cause. If they read science journals, they would find research that ties the cause of mass shootings to misfits who seek revenge and fame in a nation unique from many others for its growing fixation on fame. And you combine that with the hostility and aggression that drives social media, which conveys a warped sense of how men should act, in which misfits face shame and ridicule 1,000 times over. Well, dangerous misfits can snap in fits of deadly revenge and fame-driven rage. But again, that's getting into complicated problems in a culture that's drawn to easy answers. So tonight we're going to focus on the politicians' plans in Tallahassee and in Washington, the impact of the student rallies, and the failure of federal authorities to prevent this tragedy despite very clear warnings from the public, and where we go from here, all in the second half of our show. But we also have a lot of other ground to cover, and we will start with some controversial changes in state transportation. This is part of the state's strategy to relieving traffic. They're converting lanes that we already drive on into toll lanes that cost more as traffic picks up. There's the new express lane on the Veterans Expressway. And one of the first things you may notice here is that it can appear to run slower than the other lanes. So how does that happen? And how much will this cost? And where will the money go? And how much time will you really save? We found some of the answers in Miami, where the express lanes got started. That's tonight's We the People. $11. Holy mackerel. We're driving through an experiment in Miami that's expanding to Tampa Bay and Central Florida. And consumer watchdog Carlos Garcia says we're about to get burned.
Bordering on insane.
Bordering on?
Yes.
But not insane.
But not insane.
No, from the toll collector's perspective, it's actually pretty smart. They're adding toll lanes on existing roads. That used to be a taxpayer-built lane.
Exactly.
That our gas taxes used to maintain.
Yes.
They're called express lanes, and they can help fund more express lanes. So our taxes already paid to build and maintain the roads. We're paying the extra fees to add express lanes to other roads so that other drivers can pay extra. extra fees?
Yeah, to keep on building more express lanes.
So that other drivers can pay extra fees to fund more express lanes.
So that keeps on going and going and going.
And those express lanes charge something called congestion pricing, meaning they charge more when traffic slows down. So you're telling me the higher you pay, the slower you go?
Yes, that's exactly right.
That's right. Drivers may think they're paying a premium to dodge the jam, but the price shoots up because the express lane is jammed to try to discourage people from using it. And they're now going faster than us.
Yeah.
This is what you get for around $11.
He was on the non-toll
side. A lot
side.
faster than us.
Well, they're moving.
They're moving and we're not.
And they didn't pay $10.50.
Our state leaders say this is the future of transportation and the model for Tampa Bay, which is starting along the Veterans Expressway near Tampa. And look at this. It's already clogging up during rush hour, even before they start charging more to drive on it.
They're actually staying with 3 lanes with a slow lane as an express lane on the left-hand side, in my opinion.
So the express lane is the slow lane?
As far as I'm concerned, it is.
Mark Wallace is a Tampa roofer who says he's already paying around $3,000 a year in tolls. He does not want tolls now on top of tolls.
Waste of time, waste of real estate, just waste it.
And there's one more thing we haven't shown you yet in Miami that we saw right off the bat.
Jeez. You see that?
Lane divers.
Saw it with your own eyes.
Here they are. Lane divers plunge through plastic barriers to lurch into the express lanes when it's moving or lurch out of it when it's not. And guess what that brings? State lawmakers who have tried to ban express lanes cite 12,000 crashes in 3 years, or around 11 per day, just in Miami-Dade express lanes. Cynthia Fleischman was one of the victims. A lane diver plunged through the barrier into her, and she lost her leg.
It's an invitation for cars to come through them.
That brings us to our questions now for James Wolf, the state's transportation secretary in South Florida. Is this express lane project worth Cynthia Fleischman's leg?
We design roads as safely as we can, and we react to the conditions and make them safer.
Are the express lanes as safe as they can be?
Or you said as safe as could be. We're always trying to make things safer.
To that end, he did upgrade and add more poles to at least cut down on lane diving. And Florida's Turnpike, which runs Tampa Bay's new express lane along the Veterans, is using those same upgrades.
Anyone concerned about the cost of those lanes and thinks it's not of value to them should take the alternative.
In terms of value, Wolf says his data shows when you add express lanes, on average, all lanes move faster, even though watchdogs like Carlos Garcia don't see it.
You could stand on I-95.
I wouldn't recommend that.
No, or near I-95. No, wouldn't recommend that. But if there was video footage of 2 years ago, you could just see the congestion is greater now on the non-toll side. Yes.
Carlos also says these tolls are regressive because they take the heaviest toll on the common man.
Wherever the work areas are, where the workforce housing is usually in the further points out, and this is a concern for a lot of people.
Well, the CEO of Florida's Turnpike wasn't ready for that one.
Is this kind of toll regressive?
Could you explain that? Or?
Meaning that it disproportionately hits people with low incomes.
If you're a plumber and you can get in more trips per day, you're going to use these lanes.
Of course, that could drive up our plumbing bills, depending on how high the tolls go, which, for us here in Tampa, is still anyone's guess.
What would the maximum toll at the peak of rush hour ever be?
That hasn't been established yet.
Would there be a range?
Yeah, and that's something that hasn't been determined yet.
Can you assure veterans drivers that they will absolute peak down the road at $11?
Yeah, I don't have a...
Again, the goal is to relieve congestion, and even with the rush hour hiccups we've seen, he said cars are on average still moving a little faster in the Veterans Express lane.
The average travel speed's about 5 mile difference, faster.
That would mean if you drove 60 instead of 55 on the 6 mile stretch, you'd save around 30 seconds.
What does that mean in terms of time savings?
It's remarkably little.
And maybe even less if it takes off, or rather bogs down, anything like its inspiration in Miami.
This is a parking lot.
Yeah, a parking lot. A lot of people are paying a lot of money to be standing in a parking lot.
The first phase of the Veterans Express lane opened in December. The state expects to charge between 50 cents to $2 during rush hour. Now, for something different, Here's some video of men and women pulling off their clothes. Yeah, this was the ad that launched a state senator and a plan to get rid of the express lanes.
Every day, people are giving the shirt off their backs to pay for excessive and abusive tolls on our highways.
Last year, a bipartisan plan to phase out express lanes was getting some traction, but it fell apart when the Senate sponsor, Frank Artiles, went on a racist, sexist rant on something totally different and quit the Senate. The House sponsor, Matt Wilhite, does not know if this one is coming back.
Well, not sure. Obviously, like I say, we continue to work on ways to help them, and if there's alternatives and see how they work in other areas, we'll continue to do that as well, monitor it.
Now, please welcome former Republican Congressman David Jolly. Thank you once more for joining us.
Good to be with you.
As the state focuses on expanding express lanes and tollways, so too is the federal government and the White House plan, correct?
Sure. Yes, and this is something they continue to look at. The federal government's even looked at privatizing roads altogether, like you saw in Indiana, where you essentially sell off highways to for-profit companies or give them a 99-year lease. We saw the president just very recently say he might provide political cover to Congress if they would provide a one-time increase in the gas tax of up to 25 cents per gallon. So in the infrastructure plan, they have to identify revenue. One of the things they did with this big tax bill that they passed is they used revenue or deficits over here in another place. And so now this infrastructure plan does not have a way to be resourced.
The crux of the plan is to provide tax incentives and credits to private operators who would then recoup the cost in higher user fees and more tolls.
Right. Understand when they talk about an $800 billion plan or a $1.5 trillion plan, they're really only talking about $200 billion in federal money, and that's over 10 years. So they're really only talking about $20 billion a year in federal money, but expecting to capture revenue of 1.5. I think that's aggressive. The broader conversation on this as a matter of public policy, I always struggle with this, right? We as taxpayers have already financed these roads. And so now as you begin to add on toll roads and additional roads that come with a fee for service, look, there is some class discrimination in that in terms of users. Everybody's already paid for it, but now we're going to say if you can pay a little bit more, you get to go faster. As a society, we've decided it's necessary to ease congestion. We need additional injection of money. But we can't overlook the fact that there's a bit of a class discriminator when we move in this direction.
Meanwhile, compromise efforts on immigration reform have crashed and burned. Is this coming back or is this kaput?
I think it's kaput. I mean, this is one of those things, immigration seems to always fail at the end because they will never break apart certain pieces of it, right? The president, I give the president credit for this. I've been looking for a Republican to talk about fixing DACA and Dreamers and doing it the right way. I never thought it would be somebody like Donald Trump. But what Donald Trump has done with it, unfortunately, is instead of using it as a heart and soul issue for the country, he's using it as leverage. And we know that, we see that. The Dreamer community knows that. They're being used as leverage for him to get the additional security components. Now people would say, look, politics is hardball and you got to have those kinds of fights. But I think what we saw in the Senate recently is efforts at compromise will never be able to get the votes. And even if the Senate gets something through, whatever the Senate passes, the House probably can't pass. Whatever the House passes, the Senate can't pass. The question is, what does the president do in face of a DACA expiration? The courts have provided a delay in the expiration, but if we really get to that moment, does Trump blink or not?
Former Congressman David Jolly, thank you for your time.
Good to be with you.
Coming up, lessons and likely changes from the Parkland shootings. And we'll drill into the race for governor in Florida with Democratic candidate Chris King.
The polls show Democrats may have their best chance in more than 20 years to win the race for governor. But polls also show most voters don't know the four Democrats who are running. We put Gwen Graham, Phil Levine, and Andrew Gillum to the test. Tonight, it's Chris King's turn. He's a Harvard-educated lawyer turned businessman, and he lives in the Orlando area.
Chris King, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I want to hear the number one thing, not a list, but the top priority, the number one thing you could do as governor to either prevent or at least reduce the number of mass shootings.
Universal background checks. I think it's the most able to be done, quickest. The fact that we have thousands and thousands of private sales across our state where folks don't have to receive a background check. I think this is a big deal. I think this is something we can change, and it can get bipartisan support.
A background check that looks for criminal convictions only, cases of mental illness. what would it include?
Absolutely. Well, I think the most important thing is obviously to look for criminal convictions, to really understand a person's record. But I think most people now are suggesting that there's more that we can do as it relates to really understand if somebody, for instance, and they're talking about it in Washington right now, has been Baker Acted. The fact that we are exchanging information and that local authorities are receiving that information and able to make decisions based on that.
Should we change the Baker Act? Law enforcement, sheriffs say they need more teeth in it.
I think it's something that I would look at very closely. But I think the fact that we live in a state right now where we're 50th in the nation in caring for the needs of the mentally ill, and there's been very little focus on mental health care and the issues like public safety that surround it, is something that my administration would take very, very seriously.
But the Parkland shooter got mental health treatment. Funding was not an issue there. The Vegas killer had no history of mental illness. Is there something else going on here?
Well, absolutely. And there's something that I've been talking about all across the state. I think universal background checks are a key thing. But I believe that there has to be a real conversation on banning and limiting access to these weapons that were designed for warfare.
You favor a weapons ban. Where do you draw the line? Would you ban all semi-automatic rifles?
I feel very strongly that semi-automatic rifles should not be accessible. And I think
all semi-automatic rifles.
That's right. And I believe that the first step in that process, a great first step that I think could get bipartisan support, is raising the age limit. Right now in the state of Florida, you have to be 21 to buy a pistol. But not a rifle.
Let's shift gears to other big issues. You're a lawyer. Did Florida make the right or wrong decision in suing Georgia over access to river water for Apalachicola Bay?
Sure. Well, I think they made the right decision. Florida sued the state of Georgia, and it will be decided by the Supreme Court, we believe, towards the end of this year.
Well, it's already been decided by the master. The Supreme Court's taking a look at it. Special
right.
master in this case said that Florida made the wrong decision because it sued the wrong people, not Georgia. It is the Corps of Engineers that makes these decisions, not the state government of Georgia.
Yes, and from what I can understand, Florida is going to change its action, and it's going to, in the legal profession, change its claim and who they sue. But I think there are some significant water issues that local officials and state officials have really got to address.
You want to help students repay college debt. You also want a free college system in Florida. Tell me how much that would cost based on your estimates.
Sure.
Who would pay for it? What would you cut, or what taxes would you raise to get there?
I want to bring free community college, state college, and trade school to Florida, modeled after the state of Tennessee. Some estimates would put this at about $130 million a year. But I believe this is the type of idea that could create the workforce that really lifts wages.
Which taxes or fees would you raise, or which programs would you cut to find that $130 million a year?
Sure. Well, this is not a tax and spend liberal. I have been an entrepreneur for the last 12 years of my life. I don't believe there's been a great sense of priority in Tallahassee about what we spend money on and the return on that investment. And so there are a lot of things, for instance, they're spending money on that I don't agree with. Take, for instance, last year we spent almost $130 million on charter schools, a competing system with Florida's public school system. We've spent tens and tens of millions of dollars in fighting legal battles in Tallahassee, paying outside lawyers to defend bad decisions that Tallahassee has made. I'm familiar with one of them because my father, David King, was the lawyer who led the Fair Districts movement and effort and had to sue the state of Florida over partisan gerrymandering over a multi-year battle. He won. The state paid millions and millions and millions of dollars in legal fees to defend a failing action, and they lost.
Chris King, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And we're going to key into the Republican race next week. Meanwhile, coming up, the governor's plan to reduce mass shootings.
Here's the gist of Governor Scott's plan for reducing mass shootings. First, the money. Scott wants to spend an extra $450 million on school safety and mental health services. He wants law enforcement at every public school and at least one officer per 1,000 students. On that point, Scott does not want Florida to start arming teachers.
But law enforcement do the keeping us safe and let teachers focus on teaching.
To pay for all of this, Scott said he may have to give up on planned tax cuts. Now into gun policy. Scott does not want to ban any particular guns that are currently legal, but he does want to raise the age limit for purchasing a rifle in Florida to 21, with exceptions for the military and law enforcement. He also wants the state to ban bump stocks, which allow semi-automatic weapons to rapid fire more like machine guns. And he wants new restrictions to prevent people who are mentally ill from having guns. To that end, Scott wants to change the Baker Act so people who are committed for mental health evaluation cannot have any guns until a court allows it through due process. And Scott wants a violent threat restraining order, meaning if someone makes violent threats, you can petition the court to take away that person's guns. Scott said he expects the legislature to pass all of this within the next 2 weeks. Our closing thoughts on this when we come back.
Reading the tea leaves, Florida will likely raise the age limit for buying a rifle. Also, there will be mental health reforms and continued focus on the failures of law enforcement, from the FBI all the way to the school resource officer who did nothing in Parkland. Folks, that is our show. We will see you again next week.